Welcome to another episode of Management Muse. I'm your host, Cindy Baldy, and this is my husband and co-host, Jeffrey Tumlin.
Yellow! Welcome to the podcast where we try to inspire better work performance. Thanks for listening.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining Management Muse. I'm your host, Cindy Baldy, with my co-host from across the hotel room, Jeffrey Tumlin.
Yellow.
And joining us today is the wonderful Rhonda Mundhenk. And she is CEO of CHN and has a history of turning around clinics and then turning around a health system. And now she's into her second CEO position at CHN. And so we're going to talk to Rhonda about turnarounds. So Rhonda, tell us about your hardest turnaround.
Yeah, I think the hardest turnaround I've been a part of is actually the one that you referenced at Lone Star Circle of Care. Was a financial restructuring, about $35 million, and not a lot of hope for success in the process. So a very unlikely turnaround, not given good odds to succeed at all. And it was my first outing as a CEO. So that made it doubly difficult, at least from a personal perspective.
What made you decide to, because I mean, you had to have looked at that and been like, oh my God, I had all the responsibility and like this place is on fire. What made you take the job?
Well, I was in the COO position at the time.
Okay.
So I was already within the organization. And so these were my colleagues. These were my friends. These were the patients that I was serving at the time. So I think those things made it easier. And I figured, from a, anxiety/fear perspective, I mean, obviously you're concerned about failing. But I figured it had already been screwed up so majorly that if I added my own little special screw up frosting to the top of that cake, that, nobody would really fully blame me at the end of the day for the demise of the organization. And so
Now there's a novel approach to turn
it
around.
seemed.
Yeah, that's right. You won't hear that on any other podcast. Yeah.
So that's sort of the way that I balanced, because as I said, there were not good odds of success. It did not look good at all. So I think it was the combination of I already had a very vested interest in the organization, and from all sides, from the service side, the patient side, from colleague side and the like, and then just thinking you can't make it worse.
Okay. And what do you think that you did? Because it was a remarkable turnaround. So what do you think that you did that was different than what, your predecessor had tried? Or what do you think that you really
how
excelled
did you
in?
beat the odds?
Yeah.
Good question.
So there's elements of things. I think anybody who does a turnaround and says it was all me or it was all something that I accomplished or it was all, that's a lie. There's a lot of fortuitousness in things falling the right way for the organization. I think I kept it simple. Big problems. The more simple your solution is, actually, the more elegantly you can implement at the end of the day. And so this was a problem where we were simply spending more money than we were bringing in. So when you frame the problem as that, the solution at least becomes relatively evident. You have to spend less money. Now, the where you spend less money was a strategic decision. And so where we elected to spend less money was anything that didn't damage the core engine that then had to power us out on the other side of the restructuring. It's one thing to do all of your reductions in force. It's one thing to sort of take the hit. That's the surgery. Whether or not the patient recovers is where you took those hits, and making sure that they didn't hit any vital organs at the end of the day. So, as I think about that restructuring, what we decided to preserve at all costs was the clinical system, and to insulate the clinical system to the extent that we were able from most of the changes that were going on. And so there were some elements of the clinical system that needed to be adjusted, but for the most part, all of those reductions in force and everything else took place outside of the clinics. We did it as quickly as possible, which I think is part of the solution. If you've got hell to go through, make it short at the end of the day, so that you can assure people at the end of the day that, it's over. The reductions in force are over from here. We build from here, kind of a sort of a thing. So I think that was important, getting the pain over with quickly, and then reassuring the people who are left that
they're going to be okay.
Over.
Right.
Yeah. And then the final piece that I would say is, and this is hard, because when you're in the moment, it just seems all consuming and there's so many things to do, but you also have to provide a vision for the future that's actually going to get people through the other side of the equation as well. So, for me, which people thought ridiculous, that was, what do people sort of think of us now? And I actually had this conversation with staff and they were like, well, nothing. Well, what do they think we're going to be able to accomplish? Well, nothing. Right. They don't even think we're going to be here tomorrow. Right. That's the level of disbelief that people had in this system. And so that has a significant impact on morale, obviously. And so what I said to folks is, this is our time in the wilderness. Not only are we going to recover from this, but we're going to go away, get better. And when we come back, they're not going to know what to do with us. And that's exactly what we spend our time doing. So also sort of focusing on what you want to be during a time where nobody expects anything from you, I think is a very powerful sort of way to recast sort of, time in the wilderness, so to speak.
That might be, in some respects, like the advantage of actually doing a turnaround for a dumpster fire, and I love Lone Star, so I don't mean that today, but I mean, like I've heard the stories from the people who were there, and it was bad, but the crisis almost makes them give up or at least be more flexible about the past identity, because that seems to be one of the things that prevents organizations from turning around. Is you have a lot of people who came on board for a particular identity, and then all of a sudden this turnaround is impacting it. Well, I'm not going to get on board because I'm here because I do this. And I think you had some identity that stayed around, like this idea that you're serving people who have some problems with getting medical care. So some of it stayed, but also I think they may have, it's just a guess, but they may have become more flexible.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's, one of the, central tenets of some of the schools of community organizing is that, you never lead your people down a path that is unfamiliar, that they've never been. So you have to take some of that old identity, right? You take the good pieces of what that old identity was, or that core, whatever, you preserve that. And then you redefine and you recast for what the future is and for what the future holds. And so we were able to provide that very clear picture of look, we're good. We're not great. We're going to be great by the time we get done with this. It is very counterintuitive, because when everything is falling down around your ears, to be able to stand up and say, hey, we're going to move from this tier in the nation to this tier in the nation. Our quality is going to move from this to this. Our profits are going to move from this to this. Our system is going to be moved from this size to this size. We forecast all of that during sort of the, bowels of the restructuring, but it gave people, I think, something to hold on to in terms of thinking about sort of how do we return to form, right? Because I think that's what motivates people to be part of an organization, especially, people like to be on winning teams. That's what I will say. And when your team is losing, which is what a restructuring is, losing bad and getting beat up, and, none of it feels good, and everybody's like, you're a fool for working for this organization. You have to find a way to counteract that. So you have to say there is a way to return to form, and not only return to form, but there's a way to return to form at a higher level than we were performing previously. And everybody falls. We're going to take this opportunity to do just that. So,
what were the learning lessons that you came through with this? What are you bringing into your next position?
Yeah. I think that's as close to an anything as possible experience as I've probably had, honestly, at the end of the day. There is, and somebody actually, a new colleague of mine remarked upon this actually the other day. She was like, what I appreciate about you is how you show up. And I think that showing up, that I don't know what's going to happen today, could be the last day of the company. undoubtedly 50 people are going to yell at me about how stupid we are. Employees will be mad. Something else will break. That discipline of getting up, putting on your clothes, coming to work, and just whatever it was, showing up for it. You know what I mean? That, I think, is one of the fundamental things that I've been able to take from this position into my next position. I think the second thing I've been able to take is once you've been through something that chaotic, there is just a level of calm I think that you have. This is not my first rodeo now as a CEO. This is my second. There is a level of calm and poise. I think that after you come out of an experience like that, you can take into your next experience. And I think the best way I can describe this, and this may be a bad analogy, and feel free to cut it out of the podcast, but when I learned to play...
This will almost certainly
Leave it going in now.
Yes, I almost guarantee this is going in.
So when I learned to play rugby, rugby is a very confusing game. When you, like, first of all, why would you play it? And this is not that podcast. Maybe another time. But you know... It's a very confusing game. It is a bunch of people running around in wild formations and just kind of rolling around a field around a ball. That's how it feels when you start playing, and you have no friggin' idea what in point of fact is going on. And you're just running. Your teammates are telling you, run over here, run over there, do this, do that. And they're just directing you, and you're doing it, and you're not understanding for 80 minutes what it is that you're doing. And I remember I played rugby that was the first season. Second season started like that as well. Halfway through the second season, I remember the game where all of a sudden, I knew exactly where the ball was going. I knew exactly what the play was. I could see the holes in the opposing team's defense. And it was like everything slowed down. Game was going at exactly the same speed. This was actually a ginormous team who was one of the best in the U.S., so there was no way that they were actually going slower than any of the other teams that we had ever played. But it was the understanding. Yeah. It was the ability to read the field. Yeah, the pattern at the end of the day.
And I would imagine, know your teammates and kind of have a sense for what they might do and how they might move.
Yes. And so that I have carried from that. You know, when you've been in that chaos and you have actually learned to work through it, I think you can see things much more clearly than other people can as well. I think I've always been a tenacious person, but this gave me significant tenacity that I think that the average bear doesn't operate with, because you do understand what's possible if you actually try, if you actually show up, if you actually say, I'm going to give it 100% of what I have, which I don't think, if you haven't challenged yourself out to that level, then you just don't know what you're capable of. I think you and your team are capable of at the end of the day. So I think I have that. And then just taking a very complicated problem and being able to lead people through it in a very simple way. So I think that is a lesson of the problem itself is very complex. The going through it itself is very complex. But how you translate that experience to the people who are working with you, it has to be simple. And that is one of the things I think that I've carried with me from that experience. And then obviously just, I think lifelong friendships and colleagues are the other things. So it's great to have, folks outside of your current position who you can reach out to and be like, hey, I'm dealing with this. What, at the end of the day do you think, or what would you do, or whatever the case might be. So that it also gave me that sort of bolus of professional people around me that allow me to be able to reach out and ask people about areas of their expertise and feel comfortable doing that, knowing that has absolutely nothing to do with my skill set and everything to do with making a better decision.
Hello, Management Musers. Today, I want to tell you about my favorite product, the Comprehensive Organizational Benchmark Report and Analysis. That's right, we call it COBRA. And if you want that bad boy to strike at the debilitating uncertainty that fuzzy estimates and half-baked guesses do to your company, and better understand the social and cultural dimensions of your organization, then give us a call or email us at culsure.com. That's culsure.com. So when did you make the turn where you felt comfortable with sort of your expertise and the way that you're perceived, where you're comfortable coming out and asking for help?
That's a good question.
Or maybe you were always like that. I don't know.
No, not at all. I think there was like earlier in my career, I think there would have been a level of concern about that. Like, oh, I don't know this. I should know this, or whatever the case might be. And I think you realize the value of a team, and you learn how to use the pieces on the team when you're a CEO. Really, like, in no other position have I had that sort of experience to say, these are the people on the team, and then defining those roles for the good of an organization. It's different at the C-suite level. So I think then once you realize that, okay, I don't carry all the technical competency myself, that is shared. It then opens you up to say, that's fine. It also gives you a very good sense of, and I forgot to mention this in the lessons learned, you don't go through something like that without getting a very good sense of who you are. Who you are and what you're capable of. And so there's a true, and I guess that can go one of two ways. You can either go all the way to your head, like, yeah, I did that, or it makes you reflective at the end of the day and thankful. And it allows you to sort of see yourself, I think, a lot more clearly, and what your capabilities are and what you bring to the table. And then it also allows you to celebrate other people's contributions and accomplishments and the like. And so you naturally understand the next time, you get an opportunity for a role, which is this position, you naturally understand that it's not all on my shoulders.
Right.
And so it makes it a lot easier to just say, hey, I'm working through this, or I'm thinking about this, or what do you think about this? It makes you, I think, a much more, or it did for me, a much more authentic person.
So a lot of people hear the word turnaround and get nervous because there's this implicit underlying belief that, well, that means I have to fire a lot of people. And so now we're actually talking point blank about 20% of people, many of whom are great, have bled for the How do you continue pushing forward through something as emotionally intense as that?
Yeah. There was no other way.
Right.
There's no option.
First, you have to satisfy, I don't understand doing that if there is no other way, but
you don't understand
the reduction.
I don't understand why somebody would do reductions in force if there was no other way.
Right. That's the only,
the only way you can face your organization, I think, is to say there was no other way. Yeah. And in our particular instance, there was no other way.
Okay.
So that's the first thing. And that doesn't give you any kind of psychic satisfaction.
Right.
But you know that you're down to, this is the only thing that I can do. And it's my job to make this decision at the end of the day. So once we were like, this is the only thing that we can do, we're like, okay, fine. I think the emotional component of it is you just have to acknowledge that it is very, 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 very hard. I don't know that there's a better way of saying it. Like, acting like it's fine is not is not the way to go.
Right. It doesn't send the right message to the people who are there.
That sends you to the liquor store
that's
at 4
exactly
o'clock
right.
every day. Yeah.
That's exactly right. So I think it was, there's also, fortunately, at least in my instance, I think in the worst parts of this, there is sort of a numbness, I think, that you experience just because it's also awful. That at a certain point in time, you can't feel it necessarily as acutely as you did, maybe, because it's such a long slog that to get through it, parts of you actually do shut down so that you can just say, I'm getting up today, I'm putting on the armor, I'm going to work, and we'll see what dragons are there when I get there. And then we'll have to kill those dragons, and we'll come home, we'll sleep, and then we'll repeat tomorrow, and then we'll keep doing that until there are no more dragons. And I think you just get focused on that. You get really focused on, or at least that's how it worked for me. Now, having said that, would I approach it the same way emotionally now? Probably not. I think that for me, during that time, the only model that I had for that kind of leadership was a really stoic sort of stiff upper lip, like do what you need to do, leadership. And so, I'm not sure today.
Fair enough.
I think I have tried some things in my new position, which are much more attuned to emotions and taking care of that side of business that I would have never tried here at Lone Star, where it was like, suck it up, we're tough. So it was just sort of like, it was just,
that is a good description of Lone Star.
Yeah, I was like, suck it up, we're tough. Like, I don't know. Did you die? Did it kill you? Yeah. No, we're still alive. We're all good. Like, let's go. And so I think I'm much more nuanced about my approach to people, to change, to transformation now. And I have a lot more respect actually for the emotional aspects of transformation than I think I did back then. So that was the only way I knew how to get through then. The way that I would deal with it now, I think, would be much, much more on the side of really understanding and addressing, to the extent that an organization is able, people's emotions more. And I've taken those risks in this new position that actually paid off quite nicely. So I think that's just something that you pull forward. You understand that the thing that keeps people on the sand, right, as opposed to all running in every direction. So the thing that keeps people rooted and moving the organization forward is that sort of emotional heart. Yeah. And I don't know that I fully realized or appreciated that. I was just kind of like, we're tough. We can do this. Yeah. Nobody's dead. Yeah. Let's, those aren't, I don't think, the most motivating messages that one can give.
Yes, you're not dead is not exactly one that inspires.
So, we live and we learn. So.
Do you feel like people need certain traits to be good at turnarounds, or that it's possible to be an effective turnaround manager and leader with a lot of different variety of...
Depends on how desperate the turnaround is.
Okay.
I think that's, for us, we were in sort of an all-out dogfight. Like, everybody was coming for us.
And so you need a dog fighter. Right. Yeah, in a dog fight, you need a dog fighter.
That's right. So it depends on what the turnaround is and how it presents itself and the like. So I think... the traits that aligned with the organization at that point in time is, I am a natural fighter. I am going to, it's okay. At the end of the day, if I'm not popular, it's okay. I just had one focus, which was like, how is this organization going to get out of this hole? Like, we're going to get out of this hole. We will figure it out. Kind of a sort of a thing. But, so I think there are many ways to approach turnarounds. If you have the resources to do a turnaround, then it can be much less dramatic. This was a very dramatic turnaround. Right. At the end of the day. And so it called for different sorts of things. But what I will say is it did, I think, they needed, or Lone Star at that time, I think needed a pretty, somebody who they could tell was not just disinterested.
Right.
Not the ship is going down, let me guide it gently into the ocean, struck up the orchestra, or anything like that. Like, they needed to see somebody that was actually going to get out there and also on the front lines and just scrap for it. And that example, I think, allowed them to say, okay, we're going to scrap for it too. Because I had several conversations with staff about, what are our odds? Are we going to make it? And I will say that that's the most scary thing about a turnaround, and being sort of an inspirational leader. You have to believe that it's going to happen, and you have no idea whether or not it is. Like, it's completely actually out of your control.
Wow.
That's the truth. Wow. That's the truth of any turnaround.
Yeah.
That reality.
Wow.
There are so many external factors impacting whether or not an organization will make it through a turnaround. That you have to believe that that's going to happen without. Yeah. It's the closest thing to sort of pure faith that I've had to
exhibit.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you can't. Everybody else is thinking about the what ifs.
Right.
So you literally can't. You literally have to look people in the face and say, we're going to make it.
Yeah.
And you actually have no earthly idea if that is in fact going to happen. What you have to learn to do as a leader is take in the information that you need, but then shut it off. At the end of the day, shut off the information. And I did that. It's funny, we haven't talked about COVID at all, which was a completely novel disaster for healthcare systems.
Y'all did a great job with that.
But yeah, I mean, when that started happening, I have some background in public health. So unfortunately, I had to take biostatistics and epidemiology and things of this nature. But it just sort of all flooded back. And so I think I realized, perhaps earlier than other people because of that experience, like what this was at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And so during that early process, I was just reading and news feeds and whatever. Finally, I just realized it's that part of your brain that's trying to deal with uncertainty, and it's actually getting to the point where it's going to muddy your response at this stage in the game. So me, actually have an advantage in that you've studied epidemiology at some level. You have some sense of how pandemics work. You have a good sense of this organization, its operations. You have a wonderful sense of these people and how they're going to react and what might happen and all of that at the end of the day. I said, you just need to start formulating a response. And I literally deleted my news app at that point off of my phone.
Yeah,
and I have not put it back on.
Yeah, done with the collection
like I have
of information.
The New York Times, the news app on my phone, but I stopped obsessing.
Yeah.
Because I just realized that is just your brain trying to deal with this completely novel situation. And it's not helpful.
Yeah.
You're way overboard at this stage in the game. So I think that's the other thing you learn to do really is just sit in the uncertainty and be okay with it. Mm-hmm. And for whatever reason, I've gotten better and better at that as I've just sort of moved along.
I think that's true. I mean, like there have been things, certainly like, I grew up in an entrepreneurial household, fourth generation, and then had my own businesses, and you learn to get comfortable with uncertainty. Not that like there aren't some things that throw me off, like COVID,
right?
That threw me off initially too. I did much like you. Like I read up on all of it, and then as soon as I felt like I had an understanding and knew that we weren't going to have perfect understanding, but I had enough where I could figure out how to operate, then I was like, okay, I'm good. I'm done.
Yeah.
And so I do think that that's really an important skill that I would think would be actually pretty essential for the turnarounds.
It's very essential. It's super essential, or you lose your focus. You actually make worse decisions.
Right.
Because you're just consuming information mindlessly, and then what you won't do then is stick to a path of execution, because in a novel situation, there's information coming out all the time. What you want to do is you want to lay out your path to execution and then tack as new actually relevant information comes in that affects your course, and you want to tack to the wind. But you don't want to be like, I'm going to put up a new sail every day, or I'm going to get in a new boat every day. It's just not sustainable for an organization. So I would say that ability to not know necessarily how all of the pieces are going to come together, but still have that faith that the pieces are going to come together. And the response is going to be good. Not because you're just sitting there idly, but because of the work that you put in. So I think that there's also a confidence factor that the work that I put into this will get me to where I need to go. And that what I need to worry about is not this completely out of my control where I need to go, but the work that I put into getting there. Like that's where I focus. That's what I need.
I know that before you took the job at Lone Star, that you had turned around a lot of health clinics. Mm-hmm. And so can you talk a little bit about people who might be listening and they may realize that a part of where they work would benefit from a turnaround, or a part of their role or an ad hoc team they're on could use a turnaround? Could you talk a little bit more about kind of how people can make things better, which is just what we're talking about here, turning something around is making it better. What are some of the principles and ideas for turning things around on a more kind of smaller scale?
Yeah. So the principles aren't different, actually. I mean, the scale is smaller, but the principles aren't different. One, you have to have the why. Why are we doing this now? That's always the first question, because we always want to do things the way that we've done them because we're used to it. Sometimes there's a good reason, but most of the time it's just
taken for granted that that's how it's done.
And that's what we've always done. So what do you mean we need to do something different? So the first thing you always have to do is to overcome that inertia at the end of the day, and explain to people why this is a thing that needs to happen now. And you should be well prepared for that discussion. I think, if you've been in business for a while, if you're familiar with what you do, you have your inclinations, and those inclinations, I'm going to say, are usually right, but they are not well-marshaled arguments. So you can't just say, I think we should go left because I feel that way. That will not be persuasive. So you also have to think about what's going to be persuasive as you construct your argument for why we need to go left as opposed to right, or whatever we've always done. So I think that's the first thing. And you need to identify who you're going to present that argument to. So at an earlier stage in my career, I was working at the University of Illinois, and I was working on clinics. And this was the first federally qualified health center I had worked in. And this federally qualified health center was all of the history, all of the experience was around this one central clinic, which was on the west side of Chicago, and provided services to a very, very large, sort of one of these historically large, built in the 1960s projects, high-rise projects that Chicago was so famous for back in the day, that have all been torn down.
Like the good times.
Yes, exactly. So
TV show.
And so 20 blocks of these things.
Wow.
20 stories high apiece. Surrounding this health center. And so it was called Mile Square because the idea was that it would serve all of the people in the mile square, around. That's how dense these projects were. And that was the whole history of this organization. That was its reason to be. That was its, So when I came there, they had torn all of these down.
Wow.
They had torn all of these down, and people had sort of been scattered horizontally instead of vertically across the city.
Wow.
And so,
so now it's 10 square miles.
The city, the clinic was losing volume.
Sure.
It didn't function the way that it used to. The way that it used to, the bus would come, the doors would open, everybody would stream off. And it was like this process of flushing the system. Wow. Every time one of these buses would arrive, you know what I mean? So it was almost a surge clinic, as opposed to, so even the operations were influenced by what this thing was. And all of this is now gone.
Right.
And they're still operating with this concept that we serve a mile square, this population. P.S. And by the way, they're not here anymore. Very few of them are, which is why our volumes are declining. And so it was sort of this moment where, like, yes, we have to redefine what this organization is going to be about, because it's not going to be about this mile square.
We have to think about that's right. Actually not
so
here.
Now we actually have to look at opening other sites. One of the first things we looked at was, where is everybody moving to? It was relatively easy to track where they were moving to. So we had to open a site in a neighborhood that was all the way on the south side of Chicago. This is a West Side organization. If you know anything about the south side and the west side of Chicago, these are not the same thing, even though they are primarily both African-American areas. So but they are not the same thing.
Yeah.
And, the idea that a West Side organization would open a South side satellite was just like, what the hell is actually going on? And then the other thing that was happening at the same time, this was the mid-90s, was all of the nearby neighborhoods were becoming ports of entry for Mexican immigrants. And so there was this question of, are we going to diversify the target populations that Mile Square is going to serve? And so these were sort of quintessential discussions. So who are the decision makers in that instance? I mean, these are turnaround things. Like the organization is slowly declining. Like you can see it like, it's seeing, this number of patients, and now it's down to, but there was a trend line, and it was going in the wrong direction. And so something had to give at the end of the day. And so the people who I had to convince were the board of directors, who were primarily from this neighborhood. And then the executive director, that this would be a good idea. And I am the grants development officer.
Wow. So you don't have a lot of juice.
I'm not but I'm doing the needs assessment for the area, and I very clearly see that this is the problem. And this is probably what needs to happen as a consequence of that. There's a strategy that needs to be deployed on account of this. We cannot sit in this building, in this big old fortress, which used to have,
huge population.
This huge population in a square mile, and think that we're going to do well.
Right.
So what I actually was able to do was begin to present that information to the board of directors. I was able to present that information first I presented it to my chief executive officer, then to the board of directors and the like. And none of them are a fan, incidentally, of this idea. Like they are not fans, I should say. They are very strongly not fans. Right. And they're also who are you to tell us that we should do these things?
Go back and write grants.
Pretty much. Right. that was the initial response. What I was able to do is demonstrate. So part of this is understanding your audience. What these folks cared about very much was this world that was going away. And you're not wrong. It really was sort of the good times world. This sort of insular world of the projects that was going away. And this is what these folks cared about. The way that I was able to convince them that the future was over here was in order to continue to provide the care to the communities that you care about, we are going to have to diversify our model. So initially it wasn't, even though it was true that these other communities deserved good health care from the University of Illinois as well, and from Mile Square in particular as well. And, the world is changing and healthcare is changing, and an appeal to all of those trends wasn't the thing. The thing was to preserve this vignette of a life. We have to do these other things because that's not enough to sustain this organization. And it was the first time that I learned that if you can put together a convincing why, you can change the trajectory of an organization from wherever you are. But you have to be able to understand your audience, understand what actually needs to happen, and then describe it to your audience in a way that it is something. And here it is, again, the emotional component. It's very rarely actually the rational things that make people change big, deep-seated, deeply felt beliefs. So this was an organization that had big, deep-seated, deeply held beliefs about who they were here for and what they were, what services they would provide at the end of the day. And so to change those, you do have to have this emotional appeal at the end of the day to the things that matter to the groups that you're talking about to get that shift.
What surprised you most from your work with turnarounds? Or something, maybe not the most, but what's something that surprised you? Think back to the Chicago clinic. Think back to Lone Star. Think to your experiences now in the startup environment.
I think the most amazing thing, and even back to early career, it's nice to come back to a place and understand that you were a part of something fundamental that changed things for people. And you don't spend a lot of time, like really early on in my career, one of my earliest positions, I was working to try to establish HIV and AIDS services on the south and west sides of the city of Chicago during the height of the AIDS epidemic. There were no services with African-American community-based organizations at all. And this was the hardest hit population. And the communities, these inner city communities were on fire, from an epidemiological standpoint, they were on fire. And just no indigenous response for a myriad of reasons, which we could talk about, but they're really outside of this. And so my job was to sort of try to get community-based organizations in these areas interested, established, whatever. And we tried a lot of things. They weren't effective. I ended up writing, I don't remember what it was, 5-6 grants, something like that, 7 grants.
Wow.
on a cycle for HIV/AIDS prevention services, and we got, I think, most of them.
Wow.
These community organizations got I thought this is what I can do to really get services. There needs to be some resources. They don't have grant writers. These are complicated applications. They're not going to succeed. I was like, this is the one thing I can do, and it was actually not the thrust of the project, but I did it.
Yeah.
I did it. Yeah. And I think today those organizations are still the primary African-American organizations that are providing those services.
Yeah.
And so not that I spend a lot of time doing this, but one has to think like, what difference has that made?
Yeah.
In those communities and for people. And that's the satisfaction I think that you get from turnarounds. I think you call them turnarounds because generally speaking, they're taking you in a totally different direction that you otherwise wouldn't have gone. And that's how I would distinguish them from just like, hey, we need to change this.
I agree.
A turnaround is literally no, it's a 180. We're going this way, kind of a sort of a thing. And when you're a part of those things, the great thing that you can do is look back, and in the look back, you can see what the 180 did. And hopefully it did all of the things, and that also is outside of your control, by the way. What it does after you leave is its own thing. But what you hope that you see is that the 180 actually produces a different path. And when it's even better is when that path is no longer yours and it's continuing to just exceed what you thought.
Right.
What you thought the thing was capable of, or what it would do, or it's just a different iteration, or there is, I think, a real enjoyment and satisfaction.
Hello, Musers. Now it's time for commercial break. Today I'm going to tell you a little something about our strategic planning products. Did you know most companies don't have a strategy and most strategic plans aren't strategic? And that just doesn't sound right to us. We'll help you convene your core leadership team and shape a strategy and a strategic plan that's just right for your organization. We offer 6, 9, and 12 session packages led by facilitators with doctorates in management or related fields who also have decades of experience in business. We'll help you leverage your core competencies and your unique insights into a competitive advantage. Contact us at ondemandleadership.com. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
In a lot of the literature on organizational change and turnarounds and restructurings, they talk about the importance of a critical mass or a guiding coalition of people. What's your experience and advice on assembling that critical mass, especially if some of what you're proposing, whether it's Chicago, Texas, or your current experience, which is kind of a more national footprint, is controversial?
So, there are critical conversations that need to be had and that need to go well. So in the startup environment, because there are so few people, there are critical conversations where it's like, if this goes wrong and person X does Y, like, we're all going to suffer.
Right.
So I have to communicate this. Yeah. But how do I communicate it and move people forward, move people towards the goal, keep people moving in the direction, keep momentum at the end of the day. So sometimes, depending on the size of the organization, it can be a very individual communication or it's a critical individual communication. But normally when you're talking about critical mass, it's a group that you're trying to motivate. And I, in my head, I always see sort of, the wildebeest migration. This is just always
too much Discovery Channel.
It is always what I see in my mind, though, when I'm thinking about moving big groups of people, because when you think about big wild animal migrations, there's something that's pushing them, but then they get to the river with crocodiles and it's like, who's getting in?
Right.
And I always wonder for the wildebeest, like, who makes that decision? Who gets in the water? There's clearly crocodiles all in the water.
Right.
Like, and somehow the wildebeest decide that some people are going to jump in, and yes, some people are going to get eaten by the crocodiles. Wildebeest are going to get eaten by the crocodiles, but the vast majority of us are going to make it across and get to where we need to go. Human psychology is a lot like that. It is. Like, you have to convince people that,
we gotta get in the water.
There are crocodiles,
Get in the water
some
anyway.
people might be got, but we still have to make this move. And it is the communication process of moving the majority of the people with you, right? Recognizing that it's not going to be the whole entire herd that makes it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a critical point of, like, your attrition along the way is a natural part of the process. So you just have to have that understanding that, like, yes, this is the whole herd that I am responsible for, but I do understand that not the entire herd is going to make it to where we're going, because that is not the nature of migrations.
Yeah.
So there will be some attrition. along the way, but your goal is to get that critical mass with you. So the goal is to get the critical mass of wildebeest to jump in the water, because actually when they all jump in the water, very few of them are going to get eaten by the crocodiles. It's when they jump in one by one that bad things happen. So it's awesome. Developing that critical mass, like right there on the bank, where you're just, that's what you're doing. You're formulating that mass, that mass. And there's been a lot of that in the startup experience as well. Because there's these sort of critical no turning back points, right? When you're consolidating your IT environment, there's a critical, there's going to be a cutover, and there's no turning back at that point. And so there's a lot of these moments, there's a lot of these cliff moments where there is this natural hesitation, like, oh my God, are we doing this? And you can't just push, because if you push, it's one, and they're definitely going to get eaten by a crocodile. And then the rest of them are like, well, I'm definitely not doing that.
Not getting in there, right.
Like, that is not happening
Cannot
today.
Afford to
so
get
it's
eaten
how
today.
do you move the whole group forward across the rivers that you have to ford and the like. And it's kind of a silly narrative, but it really helps me very clearly distill the process of, like, where are we? What do we need to do? Like, how difficult is this part of the migration? And what should I expect given that at the end of the day? And what do people need to jump into the water together? Because frankly, that's the safest course.
One of the things that's always impressed us about Rhonda is her fearlessness. And that's, in this discussion, it was a reminder of that leaders and managers facing turnarounds don't expect to have all the answers, but try to figure out how you're going to put together the rationale for what needs to be done, do the work, and then take the leap. Go back to the wildebeest example of the job of a turnaround is to convince enough people to go into the river with you at the same time, and you have to pick the right river. And so if it's fear-inducing for almost everybody we talk to, and in our own experience with turnarounds, there is no certainty. But do the work, find the river, get the wildebeest shoulder to shoulder.
And I think also make the message as simple as you can, even though execution is complicated.
Yeah, I think that was a good point that Rhonda brought up. Yeah,
that is. Yeah, I find that this is not a good time to flex on your, SAT vocabulary.
Right. Yeah. Simple message. Simple message. Even though, like you said, the execution may be complex. Any last words, Rhonda? Last words are yours today on the turnaround portion of Management Muse.
That reminds me of executive coaching.
You know we were going to give you the last words going out of here. Yeah.
I don't have any other than, good luck. Some of that is needed to execute good turnarounds, and finding that comfort with uncertainty is certainly, or being comfortable, I should say, with uncertainty is, I hadn't thought about that a whole lot until today, but it is absolutely essential for your sanity. And if you are going insane in front of all the wildebeest, they will know. Yeah. So it's best to start there, and that is one of the things that is hard for people to understand. Your affect is going to, if we're going back to the wildebeest analysis, is going to affect the entire herd. So getting that affect to the place where it is calm, it is measured, it is steady. That's the thing that people actually crave in that moment. That is within your control always, no matter what else is outside of your control, to give. So I would say that's what I would leave people with. That is 100% always within your control, and 100% always yours to give to the people who are working with you through the process. So that's what I would leave folks with. Start there.
That sounds like a good place to leave folks.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Rhonda, very much.
Absolutely.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to learn more about the topic, check out our show notes. And if you want to help us out, like, share, subscribe, and 5 stars are all deeply appreciated. See you next time on the Management Muse.